Hi everyone, and welcome to another installment of Terrifying Trios. In this episode, we'll be exploring two movies and a novel with a very scary connection: mirrors and their summoning powers. Content warning for this episode. The following movies and book contain graphic depictions of violence, including death, blood loss, murder, near-death experiences, fire, and much more. Viewer and reader discretion is advised. In Candyman, 1992, we are introduced to Helen Lyle, a graduate student who lives in Chicago with her husband. In researching American folklore for her thesis, she hears the story of Candyman, a modern-day boogeyman who supposedly haunted the housing project Cabrini Green. Along with her partner, Bernadette, Helen finds that residents of Cabrini Green are reluctant to talk about Candyman, especially with outsiders. Bernadette is black, but Helen is white, and there is understandable concern that a white woman has come to profit from the community's tragic history of violence. In researching the legend, Helen and Bernadette are told about Daniel Robitaille, a talented artist who lived at the end of the 19th century. His grisly murder at the hands of a lynch mob, during which his hand was cut off and he was ultimately stung to death by bees, supposedly inspired the story of Candyman. Eventually, a resident of Cabrini Green named Anne-Marie agrees to talk about Candyman, as does a kid named Jake. After venturing into a bathroom to take photos, Helen is attacked by someone. In this way, she seems to debunk the legend of Candyman, since a real, living person is arrested for the crime. But then the real Candyman appears to Helen in a parking garage, explaining that he must shed innocent blood to keep his legend alive. And the next thing she knows, Helen is back in Anne-Marie's apartment. Someone has killed Anne-Marie's dog, and her infant son Anthony has disappeared. Naturally, Helen is accused of the crime and immediately apprehended. Her husband pays her bail and gets her home, but it isn't long before Bernadette is murdered by Candyman, and Helen is again the obvious culprit, since Candyman disappears when his work is done. After spending a month in a psychiatric hospital, Helen attempts to prove that Candyman is real by summoning him. At which point the doctor interviewing Helen is murdered by Candyman. Helen manages to escape, and she returns home to find her husband's girlfriend moving into their apartment. Desperate to prove that she is not the killer, Helen searches for Anthony and finds the baby with Candyman back at Cabrini Green. He kisses Helen in one of the most striking scenes in modern horror, his mouth and ribcage full of bees. Helen, as it turns out, resembles Daniel Robitaille's lover. Though she is able to save Anthony from the Cabrini Green bonfire, Helen dies from her injuries. But when her husband says her name in front of their bathroom mirror 5 times, she returns as a singed specter and exacts vengeance. The original Candyman is a fascinating story about race, privilege, and the power of stories. In watching this movie today, viewers might reasonably ask if Helen has any right to pursue the story of Candyman. After all, though it's based on the story of the lynching of a man who lived in the 19th century, Candyman has modern-day victims, and living people are truly terrified of him. Does Helen deserve to die for her morbid curiosity? Does her husband deserve his violent demise for cheating on Helen? Of course, the reality of this film is that Candyman's victims didn't deserve to die either, and neither did Daniel Robitaille. Created by racist violence, his story lives on in much the same way racism, inequality, and cultural appropriation do today. Much as we might wish these things would go away, they persist, with devastating consequences. In Candyman, 2021, Anthony McCoy is a talented artist who lives in Chicago with his girlfriend, Brianna. Her brother, Troy, is the one who tells Anthony the story of Helen Lyle, a serial killer who kidnapped a baby before dying in a fire. This tale leads Anthony to Cabrini Green, where a man who owns a laundromat tells him about Candyman. In this version, he was a man named Sherman Fields, who was beaten to death by police. To summon him, all you have to do is look in a mirror and say his name 5 times. This inspires Anthony's next gallery installation, a piece called Say My Name, that incorporates a mirror and relates the story of Candyman. Though one art critic is underwhelmed, after the gallery owner and his girlfriend are found murdered inside the gallery, the Chicago art world can't stop talking about Anthony's piece. Brianna watches with worry as Anthony grows increasingly obsessed with the legend of Candyman, painting haunting portraits of unknown men. Days pass, and Anthony is increasingly bothered by a bee sting on his hand, which seems to be infected. He explores the research that Helen Lyle was doing before she died, and then Anthony is alarmed to learn that other people, including the unimpressed art critic and several high school students, have been killed by Candyman in recent days. With dawning horror, Anthony goes to visit his mother, who reveals that he was the baby kidnapped by Candyman decades ago. Brianna is upset by Anthony's increasingly erratic behavior, but in searching for him, she is kidnapped by the owner of the laundromat, who wants the legend of Candyman to stop being about black pain and instead become a figure of vengeance. Anthony has been wandering Cabrini Green in a kind of trance, and he hardly seems to notice when his hand is cut off before he is shot and killed by police. Brianna is threatened by the police, who want her to say that Anthony attacked them. So while she sits in a police car, she sees only one way to escape from this waking nightmare. She looks in the rearview mirror and summons Candyman, who now takes the form of Anthony, bees swarming around him, brandishing his new hook hand. This new Candyman kills the cops who just killed him, and then his face transforms into that of Daniel Robitaille, who tells Brianna to tell everyone about the night's events. This Candyman, which acts as a sort of requel, remake, and sequel to the original, focuses both on the chilling effects of violence against black men and the power that the stories we tell ourselves have in our lives. Of course, Anthony doesn't set out to become Candyman, but when his mother, Anne-Marie, reveals what happened to him as a baby, it almost feels like a grim destiny he cannot escape. Society as a whole has yet to reckon with the violence done to black men throughout U.S. history. It's worth noting that many who die at Candyman's hand are innocent, though one could certainly argue that as Americans, we are all complicit in society's evils. However, killing innocent people seems to be exactly the point. Victims of racist violence are innocent as well, and police brutality takes the form of cops acting as judge, jury, and executioner. Candyman is not like other unkillable movie murderers. He doesn't kill because of the rules of a typical slasher film, which doom anyone who ventures into a basement alone or engages in premarital sex. Candyman is, of course, a mirror. He reflects and returns the violence done to him and his avatars by a society in which we seem powerless to stop innocent people from being killed by the very officials who claim to serve and protect. Our book this month is The Bloody Mary Saga, which actually collects two novels in one, Mary the Summoning and Mary Unleashed, both by Hillary Monahan. Four friends in high school, Jess, Shauna, Kitty, and Anna, go to Anna's house one day after school, and with Jess leading the ritual, they summon the real ghost of Mary Worth, a young woman who died in the 19th century. Mary's ghostly visage is terrifying, what with her skeletal figure, dripping wet hair that's matted and barely hanging on to the thin skin of her skull, and her gaunt face, which is often crisscrossed by bugs traveling from her ears to her mouth and nose and everywhere in between. Her eyes are sunken in, but she can clearly see the people she's looking out at. Jess dismisses the ghost, and the ritual ends. But though her friends would prefer to never see Mary again, Jess is convinced that they need to summon Mary one more time. After all, they can prove the existence of ghosts. So they return to Anna's house and gather in front of the downstairs bathroom mirror for a second time. Shauna, the narrator, doesn't notice in the moment, but it turns out that Jess changed one small detail of the ritual the second time. She moves the line of salt away from the surface of the mirror, which allows Mary to push against the glass, and the water, running down her arms and hands, washes away the salt, allowing her to escape. The important thing in a summoning like this is that the circle must never be broken, but the circle in this case is maintained by the four friends holding hands. And eventually, Kitty and Anna have had enough, and they rip their hands away from their friends and try and escape, but the bathroom door won't open. Mary grabs Shauna and scratches her, marking her, and from then on, the girls can't escape Mary. She can follow them anywhere and get to them through any reflective surface, whether that's a mirror, the glass door of a shower, or even through glasses. At one point, Mary tries to gouge out Kitty's eyes while she's driving. Eventually, Jess admits that she knew more than she told her friends about Mary. It turns out, Jess's family has a connection to the ghost. and the town where she came from, a grim place called Solomon's Folly. After traveling there to try and learn how to stop Mary from haunting her, Shauna meets Cody, a woman who was haunted by Mary for decades. The good news is that Mary isn't going to kill Shauna outright. The bad news is that she's going to kill everyone close to Shauna, one by one. And if she gets a chance, Mary takes things from her victims. Eyes, fingers, teeth. Any body part can be used to strengthen her weathered and shambling corpse. To stop Mary, Shauna will have to work with her surviving friends, they don't all survive the first book, to learn who Mary Worth was, how she died, and what happened to her body. But they have to move fast, because the only thing standing between Mary and her victims are salt and mirrors. And soon enough, even that isn't true. The story of Bloody Mary is a malleable one. It can be a game in which you try to see your future spouse or maybe just scare your friends. Or it can be a cautionary tale about the way violence against women is often ignored by society. In these novels, Mary has a lot in common with Candyman, a victim of violence in life. In death, she too attacks those who summon her and will kill the innocent with no qualms. After getting revenge on those partly responsible for her death, Mary continues to kill, lurking in mirrors and seemingly unable to rest, perhaps due to the fact that her killer was never brought to justice, and his resting place, along with Mary's, remains a secret until the end of Mary Unleashed, the second book in this duology. If you're looking for blood, more than a little body horror, and a murderous ghost, you can't go wrong with Mary. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again next month with another terrifying trio.